Now, this is a topic that is super near and dear to my heart, in that I've invested much of my life trying to pursue what I believe is the will of God, his plan, and stay engaged in the timing of that process. And I've also endeavored to help as many people as possible with this whole cycle, the will, the timing, and the plan. And I want you to pay careful attention to what I'm about to say, because having done this for over 10 years, really having done Bible studies and meetings for a good 16, 17 years, and watched many people come in and leave, and without question, the majority of the people, if they stayed any amount of time, were getting inklings of the will of God for their life. But they weren't really sure about the plan to fulfill that and the timing. And as we get into this discussion, I want you to make an asterisk next to your notes that knowing the will of God for your life is not enough alone. Knowing the will, knowing that he's called you to be an entrepreneur, or called you to be a speaker, or called you to sing, or called you to be an actress. Knowing the will of God alone is not enough. You've got to know the timing, and you've got to know the plan that he's going to use to get you there. There's a word called due season. And due season is when God's sovereignty, look at me everybody, intersects your destiny. And that's called a Kairos moment. If you're Esther, due season is when you get before the king. If you're Ruth, due season is when you're gleaning in the fields and Boaz notices you. If you're Joseph, due season is when Pharaoh has a dream that he can't interpret and he needs help. God is constantly preparing you for that due season moment. And you want to make sure that you're able to maximize it. Many people know the will of God for their lives, but they get lost in the timing and either launch out prematurely, or they procrastinate, or they get lost in the plan and refuse to stay engaged in the full process that plan calls for. Because I guarantee you, after you see our discussion tonight, the plan, as you've probably figured out, will probably take longer than you ever envisioned. So, without any delay, turn to the book of Acts chapter 7. Acts chapter 7. Our case study is going to be Moses. And again, I'm going to talk very quickly, so you're going to have to take good notes and listen quickly. We're going to be looking at Acts, we're going to be looking at Exodus, and we're going to be looking at Genesis. If you have your Bible, you want to make notes. But in Acts chapter 7, verse 23, notice it says, "Now when he was 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brother and the children of Israel." This is talking about Moses. In other words, it came into his heart to visit his brother and the children of Israel. But to get the full story, you got to go to Exodus chapter 2. Now, Exodus chapter 2, verse 11, this gives us a quick sketch. And we've talked about this before, but this is so profound to me, because here we're going to read 14 verses. It just seems like, for just 14 verses, just one little chapter. But this discourse cost Moses 40 years of his life, because he knew the will, but he didn't know the timing, and he didn't know the plan. And you can't get ahead of God's plan for your life, but you can definitely get behind it through disobedience. You can definitely slow it down. You can hinder it. You can't get ahead of his plan, but you can slow it down through disobedience and acting prematurely. Now let's look at this. Exodus 2, verse 11 says, "Now it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown that he went out to his brethren and looked at their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. So he looked this way and that way, and when he saw no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand." This is one of my favorite scriptures, because think about some of the dumb things you've done looking this way and looking that way, hoping that no one would see you. Now, It's very clear. He sees one of his brethren being beat up by an Egyptian. It's clear. Moses knows that he's a deliverer. He knows the will of God for his life is to be a deliverer, to help people, to get them out of bondage, to get them out of tough situations. It says, and when he went out the second day, 2 Hebrew men were fighting, and he said to the one of them who did the wrong, why are you striking your companion? Again, his emotions are coming up again. Then he said, who made you prince and judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? Uh-oh. So Moses feared, surely this thing is known. When Pharaoh heard of this matter, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by the well. You know the story well. Here we go again, verse 16. Circle of it, your Bible. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water, and they filled their troughs to water their father's flock. Verse 17. Then the shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. What are we seeing again? Once again, we see Moses knows the will. He knows what God called him to do. We see him stepping up to deliver them. When they came to Father Reuel, the father said, how is it that you have come so soon today? And they said, an Egyptian delivered us from the hand of the shepherds, and he also drew enough water for us and watered the flock. So he said to the daughters, where is he? Why is it that you have left the man? Call him that he may eat bread. And Moses was content to live with the man, and he gave Zipporah his daughter to Moses. So she bore Moses a son. He called his name Gershom, for he said, I have been a stranger in a foreign land. Now it happened in the process of time, the king of Egypt died, and the children of Israel groaned because of their bondage, and they cried out. Underline that if it's your Bible. And their cry came up to God because of this bondage. So God heard their groaning and remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God acknowledged them. You see, in verse 23, we see God saying, now's the timing to deliver them. But early on around verse 11, we see Moses killing the Egyptian on his own timing. And think about the presumption to think that in order to fulfill what God's called you to do, you've got to kill somebody. Wow. That's important because it's real easy to rationalize jumping out prematurely and justify our actions without even objectively looking and say, well, okay, well, why am I doing this? Is this really God's best what I'm doing right now? Do I have a peace about this? Was he going to deliver them one at a time?